Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to the second presentation. Is everybody able to hear me? Good. Okay. Okay. So um, I'm going to talk about. Should I try? Okay. So it seems like we are all good, ready to go. So yes, I'm going to talk really quick about some of our learnings from this year in terms of planet technology. I want to acknowledge some of our faculty who has been collaborating on these projects very actively. Dr. Ignacio, CMPD from agronomy. We have a couple of graduate students, undergraduate students, both in agronomy and BAE, who have been instrumental in making these projects a reality. So much thanks to them, and obviously, all the sponsors, which I'm going to talk about towards the end. So a couple of things. I want to emphasize some of the things we have been talking about over the last couple of years in terms of precision planting technologies, in terms of seed placement. This is our fifth year in terms of doing on-farm research with the different planting technologies. Over the last couple of years, we have been fortunate to have access to some of the John Deere, Exact Emerge, and some of their individual hydraulic row downforce control systems, and some of the other liquid nutrient and row cleaners, closing wheel aspect of that. What I want to emphasize in terms of the seed metering aspect is these electric seed meters, in terms of functionality, they have been really good in terms of providing variable rate seeding. And that I'm talking about from a row to row standpoint. What it has done for us is it has, turned, a 16 row or a 24 row planter into a 24 or 16 single row planters, because every single row unit is capable of doing what it is supposed to do, both from in terms of weighting the seed rate. And the second most important thing we're gonna talk something more about that is turn compensation. Turn compensation really helps us to maintain our seed population, especially on turns. Turns on the field boundaries. We have so many farms, which have irregular shaped fields. Those areas farming in contours and all those things. So we'll look at what is the real impact. Sometimes we underestimate the power of having a functionality like that. And obviously multi hybrid component part is there as well. From a seeding depth aspect, gauge wheel load uniformity, that is another very important thing, and row to row variability has been on our minds. We have been absolutely focused on looking at how to set our planters in terms of good margins, or what should be my target gauge wheel load, so that my row unit works as expected. I have more uniformity in depth, and obviously that drives to some extent in terms of the emergence and the yield as well. We won't go too much in detail about this, but I talk about it every time. The reason we want to bring this up is so everybody is aware of all of those things which have to happen accurately. From planning needs aspect, we really need my row units to perform in terms of the right RPM at all time. That means that every row unit meter has to go at the RPM which represents the speed of that individual row unit, so that I can maintain my population, my spacing, and all those things. All right, so that is very critical in terms of maintaining my seed population. Second thing is the singulation unit capability, accurate seed metering aspect of it, setting knocker, settings and seed flow, and all those specifics, settings are so important for, for singles and doubles and misses aspect of it. The third, which is the really important thing, which can really impact everything else, is my row unit operation from a downforce standpoint. What should be my gauge wheel loads, because that indirectly also impacts my row unit stability, or what we can call as ride quality or row unit acceleration. Different terms about that. A good steady row unit operation creates a good trench characteristics, which means I have a nice trench. I can place my seed more accurately at the bottom of the trench. I can get my seed trench closed. There will be less variability in terms of seeding depth, but also the acceleration of my row unit can to some extent start to impact what my seed spacing are going to be impacted from that standpoint. So all of those things are very, very critical from that standpoint. Now, obviously, there are other environmental considerations in terms of what seed lubricants we use and all that. And I want to point out that we have been doing a lot of different things around seed lubricants and seed meter wears and some of the micronutrients from Compass Minerals and all that. We don't have a whole lot of a time tonight to talk everything about that, but we'll quickly touch some of the key items in terms of the planting systems operation. So one thing which is very much kind of a near and dear to our work as the downforce aspect and how these systems can really advance or push the metering capabilities on your site. The way we have been seeing, this is a 16-row planter. The way we have been seeing is we have segregated some of these row units into wing sections, which are my outer 3 rows on either side, my non-track rows, which are not following any of the tracks, and I have few track rows which are either behind my planter or tractor high. So that we're going to look everything from each of those row unit perspective in terms of what was happening. So we'll take one example tonight, but we have multiple fields in Clay Center, a couple of them in Wamego, and to look at. The way we look at field, we try to get fields which are varying terrain, soil, and irregularity in the field boundaries and aspect of it. That we have been working for the last couple of years in terms of looking at 2 different downforces. Somewhere around 100 and 120 pounds, which was the initial industry recommendation in terms of what we should be using. And then over the years, we tried something in between, 160s and 80s and all that. We come to a point that we're going to stick around 220 pound range to look at the second aspect of it. We have been looking at different speeds. We consider that we should be at least planning at 6 miles per hour to harness the advantage of not only our investments in this technology, but to really to stretch the capabilities of the systems we have on our hand. And like I said, we are looking at all the aspects, how my spacing looks like, my depth, my emergency, and even yields from each of these wing, pinch, and non-track rows, because each of those rows are critical to me. And each of those rows, from our expectation standpoint, should behave, optimal. We don't want, a couple of rows of, 250, 300 pounds, and some of them are 140 pounds, and there are a couple which are only 60, bushels per acre. So we really want to see that, are we stretching the yield potential across the toolbar or not? So to give you a quick example, this is one of our fields in Clay Center, giving you some of the data layers we have, while considering some of the aspects we have, even for elevation, soil, EC. This helps us to, decide where to put some of our test strips. Some of the speed variants you can see at the bottom left one. And the bottom right one gives you all the aspect of where our different test strips have gone. And all these black shaded areas are our strips where we go in and we hand count the emergence, we dig out seeds, and in all sorts of things. We collect a whole lot of data from the machine aspect and the post-planting aspect of it. Our interest from a machine standpoint is that what can we learn, and and where can we fill gaps in terms of technology. But some of the things which are interesting for most of our folks is how is it doing in terms of the seed set and its behavior down the stretch. On the right is just a quick example of how a block looks like, and we drive down and implement some of those things. just to give you a perspective of what happens, hours and hours or weeks of before planting preparation and after planting data, which goes into making sure that we can bring some good data to you guys. Some of the things I want to talk. This is, and we can go back and compare a lot of things between what happened in 17, 18, and 19, and all sorts of things. But this is 2020 data. This is something we want to talk about, the plant spacing. What you're looking at is there are two plots, one on the left and right one. The left one talks about the spacing happened when we were operating at 120 pounds of gauge wheel load or margin. And then the right gives you a perspective what happens when you have a 220 pounds gauge wheel load or margin. Three speeds, different colors. The blue represents track, the orange represents non-track, and the gray represents the wings. Right. So when you see everything from the standpoint of spacing part, pretty decent, spacing. Always we have CVs always under 22, 21%, and some of those CVs are primarily for 10 miles, but pretty tight spacing irrespective of whichever row you're looking at. There are a few kind of outliers this year in terms of wings and tracks, but more or less the speed, the irrespective of speed, your spacing has been pretty good. So one thing, and I'm going to keep talking about that, folks, is because not only we have this technology, we have invested money in this part of it, but the focus is that we want to put some confidence into your hands that if we have a technology like that, we can really stretch the way we plan, the way we operate, because there are times, we have seen these times over the last couple of years, that we are always in a tight window of planting. We have good moisture right before planting, especially in the area where we are in and around Manhattan, but it can be in many other spots. In terms of seeding depth, which probably is of the most interest to a lot of people. So what I'm going to talk about is we targeted our seed spacing and seeding depth in terms of how our planter was set, somewhere around 1.87, 1.9 inches. So, looking at all the way the scales are, but the same way 120 and 220 pound, but what you will see on the 220 pound range, we have some issues in there in the non-track region at a 7.5 mile speed. But going back, we look at some of those things, and obviously that was one of the compacted zones within the field, which has an impact. But other than, you can see that irrespective of the type of the row at 6 miles and 7 miles, and even at 10 miles, I was pretty tight in terms of maintaining and attaining my seeding depth, except for the wing rows. All right. So this is something which is something we want to see going forward. Now, again, this is a 16 row planter. If we have 24 row planter, which is getting more and more popular, and being accepted in terms of what we want to do in a short window, that those wing rows, especially outside rows, may need to be looked at in terms of how they get the seed down in terms of depth. Now, 120 downforce, is good, but it's not forgiving for speed. We can set this downforce and we can go out and drive at 5 miles or smaller speeds. But obviously, as you see here, and this is what we have seen over the last many years, that this kind of a downforce is not enough. And I know a lot of people are thinking, sitting here, that is, well, 200 could be a lot more. I'm going to show you a lot, a couple of other things for you guys to think about. A couple of slides on emergence. This is 2 different downforces at 6 miles, and then we have 2 different downforces at 10 miles. And you can see that there is, from an emergence standpoint, we have always seen in the last many years that 3 to 4 years in ideal situation, in terms of 3 to 5 days in ideal situation in terms of coming out everything. All right, we are not talking about the some of the compass mineral micronutrient work we have done this year, but I want to throw out a little blurb, and you guys can reach out if you need more information, that In some of our trial with micronutrient this year, we saw on day one of emergence, 92 to 95% emergence on day one, and in second day we have everything emerged on those trips. So that was so I want to throw a disclaimer. This was first year on corn. We have been doing a lot of work on soybeans, but first year on corn, only one site and one plot, but looking at how good the emergence was, that was pretty fascinating from that standpoint. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the aspect of we saw that plants emerge in different dates, and there are a few outliers where plants come even after on the 10th or 11th day. Very few, and I'm going to say less than 1% and all that. But what I want to show you guys here is that irrespective of the day of these plants are emerged, at a V6 stage, all of those plants were in the same ballpark in terms of plant height. So we wanted to look at the plant uniformity in terms of stand uniformity in terms of how they look like, and we also want to look like how does the root structure look in terms of different downforce and all that. And we have not seen any significant difference in terms of how the root structure looks like. So this was also so these two things we have done this year. We have not collected this kind of data in previous years, but looking at the height of the plants at V6 and the root structure, I can safely say that even going at 220 pound gauge wheel load, there is no compaction in terms of what some people might. We also used to think that might be a case, but that's not the case at all. Comparison of yields. So if you compare, all the 220 pound versions versus 120 pound versions, we have a yield advantage anywhere from, and it goes from different sites and different plots, but anywhere from 3 to 6 bushel difference in terms of the selection of the downforce from here. And I also want to kind of throw this out that the use of that micronutrient on our single site this year, those sites which has micronutrients has an advantage of 10 to 12 bushels per acre. And again, I want to say this is single site, first year. We don't know how good that is. So we are excited to go out and do something this year and see how solid those numbers are. This is, I just want to throw out, what we look at. We look at many things in terms of how your gauge wheels were, what your row unit accelerations were. And this is, each plant in one strip, and we have, plots after plots to look at. And what we are trying to make sense of is what makes one year a 200 bushel year, another 120 bushel year, and why is that? Sometimes those seeds are side by side, set the same way, they came out the same way, and all that stuff. One thing which we think has been one of the keys is that if you see these 5 or 6 plants which all came on day one, you will see that their plant heights are pretty uniform and their area size is pretty uniform. So something which a lot of people have been talking, you guys have heard and I've heard, and I'm not an agronomist, but I'm pretty sure Ignacio Ciambidi is out there, scratching his head and maybe eager to speak out something, but uniform emergence, early has something to do with both the uniform plant height and something to do with good uniform years from plant to plant. But this is something that we're going to keep working on. Maybe we can bring more data information for you guys in future. So some in the ballpark of 100, 200 to 220 pounds downforce, depending on your soil type a little bit, has been, absolutely kind of a magic number or a sweet spot, if you want to say, which gives you flexibility on speed, more uniform depth, and also spacing and emergence aspect of it. Overall, really adding the part of it. And one thing I want to add more from planting system standpoint is the component of turn compensation. We know that these meters can manage speeds to match the row unit speed to give us this the singulation aspect of it. So we We went out and looked at 8 different fields which were varying shape, size, and the field sizes were anywhere from 37 acres to 220 acres. And we have grass waterways, obstacles, and we looked at different data set, and we went out and we devised a pretty neat algorithm to come up with the areas which were planted, on curls when the plant turn compensation was active, and give you some idea on how much area can be there. So the way we looked at, we classified a turn which was less than 20 meters as extreme turn, somewhere between 20 to 50 as medium, and slight medium, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, give some perspective to it. All right. So turns with smaller radii definitely results in 85% speed increase from inner to outer. So that's what we were looking at. So few examples here. These are 2 fields. One field on the left is roughly 70 acres. One on the right is somewhere around 120, 125 acre field. And you can see all those little areas which were planted with turn compensation. All right. Now there are extreme turns, there are medium turns, there are slight turns, and so on and so forth. But overall, if we add up, if you look at where the fields were, depending on what you have, it can be a significant amount of area which could actually go in planting with turn composition active. Now, the thing we want to really emphasize is this is a technology which comes default if I have an electric seed meter, because they can manage my speeds pretty accurately. And if you look at the radii aspect of it, in terms of number of acres which were planted, and so on and so forth. But if we see the entire on all the different 8 fields we have seen, the percent area ranged anywhere from 4.5% to 12%. All right. Now 4.5%, 5% area is good area for me to look at. That do I need to do something to get my seed population or spacing right or not? All right. When I'm talking about 10%, that's a pretty significant area to look at for management standpoint. So when we are looking, from that standpoint, depending on how wide your planter is, this is 16-row planter. If you have a 24-row planter, this area is going to significantly increase, right? Because I have bigger toolbar, my 2 passes or end row passes are going to be, larger area, which I, plant with 16-row. And obviously my seed population, typically we can vary anywhere from 15, 20,000 population, from the inside to the outside as well. And I'll leave something to agronomists in terms of if we are down and up by this kind of population from my target, I definitely have, kind of a road to impact my yields to some extent. And obviously, we have gone out and looked at, numerous, rows and strips where we can see that, the turn compensated areas were spot on in terms of my population, bearing few very tight turns where, population was slightly low, but other than that, it was pretty good from that standpoint. So again, the take home message for that, if I'm looking at, if you have fields which have contours, or, smaller irregular fields, or, larger regular fields, or there are a lot of grass waterways, the way you plan around that, I think there's a big value in terms of really looking at those things. So back to what we've been talking about, we can plan faster, all the way up to 7.5, 8 miles, absolutely, without losing anything on your seed spacing, seeding depth, emergence, and so on and so forth. And obviously, every single row can give you the spacing part of it from that part. The last thing, and very, very quick, I won't spend more than a minute on that. We've been asked this question over and over again in terms of row unit uplift. Do we need that or not, and how much it impacts? So it's very difficult to really, map out, because there are a few systems and there are a lot of proprietary things which are on there. But we came up with a pretty neat methodology to quantify my disc load, right? Real-time disc load, how much load your discs are juicing up to get to that 2-inch depth, which can ultimately now give us an idea that looking at what my row unit, dead weight is, and everything else, like how much hydraulic, downforce and all that stuff. So we came up with an idea, and then we can segregate areas based on what will be your target gauge wheel load, that what percentage of the area will need uplift if you have a system like that. All right. Bear with me. It's a little, there's a lot going on the back end in terms of how we got there, but and it depends on your soil and how much you set it up. But if we set these down forces, say example, you set that 195. This is example where for this field, this is a 130-acre field in Clay Center, pretty nice uniform field, has some grass waterways. But you can see that if I set that, I only need uplift for 3% of the time, right? But this is if you want that kind of a gauge wheel load or margin. If you go lower on what you need, say for example, if you want half of it, I want to do only 120 pounds of margin or gauge wheel load, then that percent time where you might need uplift goes up by 11%. All right. So 3 to 11. Now that is a significant area where you might consider that I have to have that kind of a technology on board. But now bear in mind that it is all driven by what is your gauge wheel load, target gauge wheel load you want to maintain or margin, right? If you are in that range, and I do not know the dead weight of all the row units off top of my head, but most of the row units are in that ballpark of 230, 200, 250, 55 pounds, right? So if you look at that from that perspective, if I'm not planting at lower gauge wheel loads or lower margins, there is less advantage to it. But if you are, then there might be more. So this is I'll end here. Like I said, uplift percent really depends, is driven by the gauge wheel load targets or margins. Obviously lighter textural soils, till fields, obviously you will need a lot more. All right, if you are using these systems on till fields, absolutely you will need some sort of an up force to really manage your gauge wheel loads and everything else. So this is where I end. I really want to thank obviously Kansas Corn for this opportunity. This is a great medium to come out and showcase what we are doing. John Deere, who has been sponsoring some of the research, and USDA NIFA, who has sponsored another project for the next 3 years. And obviously Compass Mineral is here. So we want to thank them for their continued support for our program. There are a few links here if you guys want to ask questions. So thank you so much for being here this evening.
AJ, there's a few questions here in the chat for you here. You pull it up. The first one was Aaron asked, and I think this was in reference to one of the first set of numbers you put up. What was the tillage system on that plot?
So all of our fields are no-till. We have done few fields with cover crops. This year we do not, or we did not have. Well, we had one cover crop, but that data is not here. So all of those fields are soybean residues, no-till fields.
And Tanner asked, is the downforce, there's a total downforce per row or margin?
So what this is 120 or 220 is my margin, right? That's what I'm going to set as a margin. Means that I want those kind of, so when I say 220, I want those, an average of 100 pounds on each of my, my gauge wheels. So that's how we set it up.
Did you have the system you had, did it allow for lift and downforce on all of the setups or just on that one?
No, so John Deere does not have a lift, component on that. We have this individual row hydraulic downforce control system. Like I said, ExactEmerge, we have pneumatic controls for row cleaners. We have pneumatic controls for closing wheels. I have not talked about something like set point and margin, which are the two options available, specifically from this manufacturer, from a John Deere standpoint. And we can talk about that as well. But if you smartly select set point option as well on your fields, you will still be okay in terms of managing your, your depth at all times. It slightly depends on good uniform fields. If you do not have uniform soils across the field, then set point may not be the best option.
And couple more here, and we might get a little feedback where we're at. So Eric asked, how would an active downforce system, 97% gauge wheel contact, compare with the static downforce system from the data you presented?
I do not. So Eric, I didn't get what. Can you type it again? I've not presented anything which was from a set point standpoint, which we have tried to do something more from a fixed downforce part. All of our data this year is from active downforce control. We go in, we set our planter for a certain gauge wheel margin, which the way this all the planter set is that means that the control system is going to fight to manage those load or gauge wheel loads, so that those load cells can continuously read that load and feedback. If it goes up and down, I'm gonna put more downforce or offload something. Is that something helps? All right, that's a great question. There is one study which has recently been published at University of Wisconsin by the people at University of Wisconsin-Madison. The name, one of the authors on that study is Brian Luck. They have done that study across the state at few sites, but we are on track to do some of the Yetter, the spike closing wheels in 2021. We really want to see how do these different closing wheels have some sort of an impact in terms of everything to do with the soil to seed contact and either the displacement of the seed, but we haven't seen anything on that. Our focus now, I can tell you that going into 2021, nutrient, how do we apply nutrient? And guys, and I would really welcome either now or later, if there is anything on your mind that you guys would like us to see. We are fortunate to have good planting systems from different manufacturers. We have access to different fields across Manhattan, so we would love to include some of your feedback on that. So like I said, 2021, the nutrient parts on the closing wheel work, that has been, and then obviously the micronutrient part will be our focus going forward.
Your questions. So
all right. Get everybody muted down the row. All right, excellent. So a handful of weed management questions here, and I'm just going to read through what we got. And Josh, I'll count on you to let me know if anything comes in while I'm talking, okay? So first question, is Fexapan going to get a label? This whole dicamba thing has been a moving target since last summer. The last I have heard is that Corteva is not going to request a label for Fexapan, at least for 2021. Initially, the comment from my Corteva rep was that they were going to wait and see what happens with XtendiMax. So I'm kind of guessing that, I'm reading between the lines here, but guessing that means it could happen for the future, but it's not going to happen for 2021. So that's a very good question. And like I said, the situation with dicamba is still surprisingly fluid. I do know that both Bayer and BASF have their training opportunities open now. So while we're on the subject of dicamba, just a reminder that everyone needs to do their training online if they intend to apply those products. The next question from Eric, would you recommend against Callisto in both pre and post herbicide passes? When we think about herbicide resistance management, which is, like it or not, kind of the name of the game when we're talking weed management these days. The more diversity we can get in our weed management system, the better off we're going to be. So that needs to be diversity, not only in herbicide site of action, but also, different management practices. So crop rotations and things of that nature. So the short answer is, would I recommend against it? Yes, I would recommend against it. As far as doubling up on the Callisto, we want a full dose, a fully effective dose in the field so that we aren't allowing for plants with low level resistance to escape. So next question, significant differences in acetochlor versus metolachlor. This, my friends, is $1 million question. And, there's almost as much, it's just a good question. I am trying to get to share a slide here with you from an old presentation. Let me do a little manipulating with my computer here. Maybe, there we go. All right. Oh, AJ, can you stop screen sharing?
Oh,
Sorry. Nope, no worries. We're good. We got this. All right. So this is a slide from an old presentation. These are some data that one of Dallas Peterson's students collected, looking at 5 different site years, looking at pigweed control with various pre-emergent products. So Zidua, S-metolachlor, metolachlor, various acetochlor formulations, Outlook, and Prowl. So, the Zidua, the dual magnum, and the harness 4 weeks out were the greatest levels of control. The Outlook, the Prowl among the lowest by the time we got to 8 weeks out. So I show you this to say that the answer to this question is pretty environment dependent. As far as which is the preference, there's some thought that acetochlor is a little bit better than metolachlor on pigweeds. Acetochlor does require just a little bit less rainfall for activation. So if you're concerned about activation, if you're thinking about that layered residual approach, that may be something to consider. So there was that question. Then there was another question about potential synergy with a couple of products, with clopyralid and mesotrione and Stinger. So Stinger is a premix, right, Resicor is a premix of Stinger, acetochlor, and meso, right? And so that's where this basis was coming from. Or where this question was coming from. And there's no evidence in the literature of synergy there. We've seen some synergy with the group 27 herbicides like meso and atrazine, but not with other types of products. And so just, the kind of background there is there's a difference in synergy and additive effects. So probably what you're seeing is just an additive effect there, where we would expect the meso and the acetochlor to have more activity. They're not necessarily increasing the activity of the clopyralid, of the Stinger component per se. So, here we go. We've got another comment here. Get around to it. All right. Yeah, so the difference in that encapsulation, just trying to get that acetochlor product to stay in the soil a little bit longer. Yeah, so, okay. I think that's it, right?